The Victorian era is often bathed in the soft romantic glow of period dramas, all flickering candlelight, hand-pressed letters, and sweeping silken gowns. But for the men and women of the 19th century, society wasn't a romance. It was a high-stakes performance that governed their actual lives. Etiquette in the 1800s wasn't just about being polite. It was a rigorous, invisible architecture of control. If you knew which fork to use, you belonged to the inner circle. If you failed, you were an outsider. Hello, I am Dr. Amy Boyington, and today we are stripping away the lace to examine the many layers of social engineering that governed every breath, every glance, and every gesture of the Victorian elite. To understand the why behind these rules, we must first understand the doctrine of the separate spheres. This was not just a social preference, it was a pseudo-scientific ideology that dictated the very movement of human bodies. Men, for example, occupied the public sphere, the chaotic world of politics, commerce, and war. Women, however, were confined to the private sphere, the home, the nursery, and the altar. Etiquette served to control the meeting of these two worlds. If you lived in the 19th century, your reputation wasn't something you had, it was something you guarded, minute by grueling minute. This was an age of massive upheaval. The Industrial Revolution was destroying old class lines, and cities were becoming crowded with new money and strangers. In this chaos, etiquette became the ultimate filter. It was the only way to prove that you were one of us. But why was the code so rigid? Why were there hundreds of manuals like the Ladies' Book of Etiquette and the Habits of Good Society dictating every move? For the Victorians, order was safety. In a world without social safety nets, your character was your only insurance policy. For a man, a breach of etiquette could mean the end of his credit at the bank or his standing in Parliament. But for a woman, the pressure was absolute because she had almost no legal rights, no right to her own property, her own wages, or even her own children. So her standing, her social standing, was her only currency. Etiquette, therefore, was the operating system that kept the spheres separate and that hierarchy intact. These manuals did not just teach you how to eat, they taught you how to survive. They dictated the geometry of a woman's life, how many inches to lift a skirt to avoid the mud without appearing suggestive, the exact duration of a morning call, and the precise angle at which to bow to a superior. One wrong gesture could be an embarrassment, but it also could be social execution. Today we're cracking open these manuals to decode the rigid high-stakes architecture of Victorian control. This is the secret language of the gilded cage. One of the most powerful tools of Victorian control was the calling card. This was the 19th century version of a background check. The ritual was precise. If you arrived in a new town or wished to maintain a friendship, you did not simply knock and ask for tea. You left your card. According to Cassell's Household Guide, a lady's card was a legal document of her status. So when visiting a house, you gave your calling card to the butler, to the maid, who would then go and take it up to the mistress of the house to see if she wanted to see you. If the mistress of the house was not at home, the classic Victorian white lie, it meant that you were being vetted. If your card wasn't returned within a week, you were socially ghosted. To be cut was the ultimate social execution. Emily Thornhill's manual warns that the cut, the act of staring directly at an acquaintance in public without any sign of recognition, was the most violent act of manners possible. It was a tool used to prune the social garden, ensuring that only the right people remained in the light. Moving on. For the Victorian youth, privacy was an alien concept. Courtship was a three-person game played under the unblinking eye of the chaperone. The chaperone, usually a widowed aunt or a vigilant mother, was the physical manifestation of social anxiety. A lady could never be alone with a man who was not a close relative. Even in the seemingly private space of the carriage, a gentleman never sat next to a lady who was not his wife. He sat opposite her, with his back to the horses, a position of inferiority that nonetheless allowed him to maintain constant visual surveillance. For men, this created a performance of virtue. A gentleman couldn't just date, he had to navigate a fortress of female relatives. Every word he whispered was effectively recorded by the ears of the chaperone. This system turned romance into a transaction of reputations rather than an exploration of hearts. However, perhaps the most suffocating layer of etiquette was the mourning code. After Prince Albert's death in 1861, Queen Victoria turned personal loss into a national mandatory performance. Grief was no longer an emotion, it was a wardrobe. The timeline was ironclad. For a widow, the first year was deep mourning. She was required to wear solid black crepe, a scratchy matte silk that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. Jewellery, parties, and even lustrous fabrics like silk were forbidden as callous. Gradually, she moved into second mourning and finally half mourning, where grey and lavender were finally permitted. This system ensured that a person's internal state was always a matter of public record. If a woman laid aside her black veil too early, she was labelled as shameless. Etiquette took the most raw human experience, loss, and turned it into a public test of loyalty to the social order. However, the Victorian dinner party was the ultimate laboratory of social engineering, a 3-hour marathon of performance that began long before the first course was served. To the uninitiated, it was a minefield. To the elite, it was a matter of course, where one standing in the empire was either solidified or shattered over a bowl of clear turtle soup. The evening began not in the dining room, but in the drawing room, where guests were expected to arrive with military precision, usually 15 minutes after the time stated on the invitation. Arriving early was an intrusion, arriving late was an insult. Upon entering, the host and hostess would perform a series of silent, rapid-fire social calculations. As noted in Cassell's Household Guide, this was the period of the presentation. If you had not met your dining companions, the hostess would perform the introductions, carefully moving down the table of precedence. A baronet was introduced to a viscount, a younger lady was presented to an older one. This was the social vetting stage, where the hierarchy of the room was established before a single calorie had been consumed. When dinner was announced, usually by a butler who appeared like a silent spectre in the doorway, the room transformed into a choreographed parade. This was the processional, and it was governed by the rigid laws of the British peerage. The host would offer his right arm to the lady of the highest rank in the room, she was the guest of honour, and he led the way. The other guests followed in a strict descending order of title and age. A gentleman never simply walked with the lady, though, he conducted her. The gentleman was expected to engage in light, uncontentious conversation during the walk to the table, ensuring that the lady felt shielded from the bustle of the servants. To take the wrong place in this line was to suggest that you outranked your superiors, a gaffe that could lead to a permanent social ghosting. Once seated, the table itself became a map of Victorian morality. Etiquette manuals like the Ladies' Book of Etiquette, published in 1860, dictated the directional talk. During the first few courses, a guest was expected to converse exclusively with the person on their right. Midway through the meal, the hostess would turn the table by shifting her attention to the person on her left. Every guest was then expected to follow suit immediately. To remain talking to your initial partner after the turn was to commit a brawl of manners. The Victorian dinner itself was a silent operator. One never gnawed on a bone, never used a knife to convey food to the mouth, and never under any circumstances reached for a salt cellar. If you needed something, you caught the eye of a footman. The Habits of Good Society, published in 1859, warned that to eat quickly is a sign of low breeding, while to eat too slowly is to be an encumbrance to the service. You were expected to maintain a polished distance from your plate, sitting upright with a modest and intentionally measured posture. Everything about the dinner table was complicated. The climax of the evening's control occurred after the dessert course. In a ritual known as the withdrawal, the hostess would catch the eye of the lady of the highest rank, give a slight nod, and rise. This was a signal for the ladies to exit the room, usually in the reverse of the initial procession into the room. They retreated to the drawing room for tea, coffee, and soft conversation. This served two purposes. It allowed the women to discuss domestic and social matters away from the coarser talk of the men, and it allowed the men to remain in the dining room to drink port, smoke cigars, and discuss the public sphere of politics and business. After about 30 minutes of separation, the gentlemen would then join the ladies in the drawing room. This was the final act of the night, a period of music, singing, or perhaps a game of whist. However, even the exit was regulated. The French leave, that is, simply slipping away without making a scene, was the preferred method for high-status guests. One did not announce their departure, they simply vanished. To stay too long was to tax the hospitality of your hosts. By midnight, the house was expected to be silent, the candles extinguished, and the social order successfully defended for another day. If the dinner party was a test of physical and conversational endurance, the Victorian ballroom was even more strenuous. It was the only space where the separate spheres of men and women truly collided under the glow of gaslight and the scent of expensive hothouse flowers. But this wasn't a place of leisure, it was a marketplace, and the rules of engagement were designed to manage the explosive potential of young people in close proximity, while maintaining a veneer of absolute moral purity. A lady never entered a ballroom without her programme or dance card, a small, often ivory or silk-bound booklet attached to her wrist by a decorative cord. This was her social ledger. As the Ladies' Book of Etiquette warned, a lady should never dance more than 2 dances with the same gentleman. To grant a third dance was not merely a sign of preference, it was a public declaration of a serious attachment, a move that would set the chaperones into a frenzy of speculation. If a gentleman asked for a third dance and was refused, he was expected to bow and retreat immediately, for to persist was to compromise the lady's reputation. The music itself was also a tool for control. While the quadrille was a group effort, the waltz and the polka allowed for a terrifying level of physical closeness. Consequently, the physical boundary was strictly enforced. A gentleman's hand was to be placed firmly but lightly on the lady's waist, never splayed, never lingering, and always with a gloved hand to prevent skin-to-skin contact. The distance between their bodies was a measured moral gap. Manuals were explicit. In dancing, the gentleman should never hold the lady's hand behind him or on his hip or high in the air. The posture was to be stiff yet graceful, ensuring that even in the heat of a fast-paced dance, the angel of the house remained untouchable. Ultimate control of the ballroom was given to the master of ceremonies or to the hostess. A gentleman could not simply walk up to a lady and ask for a dance, he had to be formally introduced. If a man approached a lady directly without a prior introduction, he was guilty of a gross intrusion. Conversely, if a lady wished to snub a suitor, she had to do so with surgical precision. If she refused an invitation to dance, she was socially forbidden from dancing that same dance with anyone else. To turn down one man to accept another moments later was a public insult that could result in a duel between the gentleman involved or the permanent blacklisting of the lady from future guest lists. While the wine flowed and the punch was plentiful, the ballroom was a dry land for the truly respectable. Getting drunk was the ultimate social no-no. In the Victorian mind, alcohol stripped away the very self-control that etiquette was designed to build. For a gentleman, even a slight stumble or a slurred word was enough to have him quietly escorted out and never invited back. The Habits of Good Society of 1859 was scathing on this point, noting that a man who drinks to excess in the presence of ladies forfeits his claim to the title of a gentleman and becomes a mere animal. For a lady, the rules were even harsher. She was expected to merely sip her champagne. To show the effects of alcohol was to suggest a laxity of character that no amount of dowry could fix. The supper room was a place of refreshment, not indulgence. Once the music of a dance stopped, the choreography of safety continued. The gentleman was required to offer his arm and lead the lady back to her seat, specifically to her chaperone. He was strictly forbidden from monopolising her time after the dance. While they might stop at the cooling room for a refreshing glass of lemonade, he was expected to return her to her rightful guardians within minutes. As manuals put it, to linger is to invite gossip, and gossip is the rust of a lady's reputation. The ballroom was a place of visible virtue. You were allowed to be seen, you were allowed to be admired, but you were never under any circumstances allowed to be alone in a crowd. Of course, that is only referring to women, because if she was seen to be alone with another man, she was to compromise her own reputation. And that, in turn, would compromise her ability to marry. Because of these strict rules, young men and women developed a secret code and a secret language all of their own involving the fan. By the flick of a wrist or the snap of silk, a woman could carry out an entire conversation with a man without ever breaking her persona or her virtue. For example, drawing the fan across your forehead meant you have changed. Resting it on your right cheek meant yes. Dropping it meant we are friends. This was tactical subversion. In a world that demanded their silence, women used ivory and lace to speak volumes to their men. So what is the final verdict? We've looked at these rules and we've seen a gilded cage, but for the Victorians, these bars provided a sense of permanent stability. In a century of brutal industrialisation and shifting borders, etiquette was the only thing that told you who you were. As the 19th century drew to a close, the new woman would begin to trade her dance card for a bicycle and her chaperone for a career. We look back at the 19th century and see a world of absolute repression, a gilded cage built of lace, ivory, and bone china. We see the woman who could not walk the street without a guardian, and the man who lived in terror of a misplaced calling card. But to the Victorians, these rules weren't just chains, they were a map. In a century defined by the terrifying speed of the steam engine and the crumbling of ancient traditions, etiquette provided a sense of permanent stability. It offered the illusion that if you could master your posture, your conversation, and your mourning veils, you could master your fate. I am Dr. Amy Boyington, and I hope that you have enjoyed this video. If you have, please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you.